then when they can find anything that you say that could, without further explanation or definition, be misconstrued as appealing to this definition of you. Like, for instance, when all this, what I guess they call themselves incels, involuntary celibates, when all this stuff went down, when this guy drove his car into a group of people, it's a horrible tragedy. One of the things that you talked about with incels is that, and this was a part of the, what was it? It was a New York Times hit piece.
Yeah.
You said one of the cures for this is enforced monogamy. Mm-hmm. People decided, and I had never heard that term before, quite honestly, and I was like, well, what the fuck does that mean? It's a psychological term, and what it means is enforced by culture, that it is a good value.
Monogamy, yeah, because
Right.
polygamous societies tend to become ultra-violent.
Yeah.
And that's been known in the anthropological literature for 100 years. And certainly leftist anthropologists were among those who discovered it. Like, the journalist knew perfectly well what I meant by enforced monogamy. She's not stupid.
You use it as if everybody would understand it because you're an intellectual and because you're a professor and this is what you do.
It was also 2 minutes out of a 2-day conversation.
Yes.
It's like, so it was something we just glanced over. Well, that was funny in some sense, because my sense is if you want to pillory someone, you should attribute to them views that someone somewhere has had. And the implication of that part of the New York Times article was that I wanted to, take nubile young women at the point of a gun under state enforcement and deliver them to useless men. It's like no one has ever believed that. So
but it sounds like that. It's the optics of that statement are very bad. But the question is, why wasn't there follow-up questions? And if there was follow-up questions to get you to define what you mean by enforced monogamy.
Well, there were. They just didn't make it into the piece.
Well, that's a real problem.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
That's a real problem because
it's so ridiculous. Because
it's an inaccurate definition of who you are.
Well, one of the things I've said continually, and this is on record in multiple places, it's like, okay, so you're a young man, and all the women are rejecting you. Who's got the problem? It's not all the women. That's a bad road to go down. If all the women are rejecting you, it's you.
We both agree on this, but why is enforced monogamy the solution for people that are involuntary celibates?
Well, it's the solution to the relationship between men and women. Fundamentally, is monogamous social norms.
Yeah, but these men are unattractive. If these men are unattractive,
solution to them.
But if these men are unattractive to women, I don't mean just physically unattractive. I mean women aren't seeking them as mates. Mm-hmm. They need to become men.
Yes, they certainly do.
That's the
solution.
That's the solution.
Absolutely,
and we both agree on this. So,
yes, but they need to do that in a society where monogamy is the social norm.
But isn't it the social norm anyway?
Well, that was partly my point. Although, to the degree that we deviate from that, we tilt towards a more violent society. I was making a very minor point.
I don't think they're related, quite honestly. I don't think that involuntary celibates, I don't think that having enforced monogamy as a part of our cultural norm is going to help those people. I really don't.
It does.
How's it going to help them?
Well, because what happens is if a polygamous society develops, which is the alternative, then a small minority of men get all the women. That's what happens.
Oh, okay, I could see that.
That's the only point that I was making.
Theoretical world where polygamous societies exist en masse, and then you do have this problem where there's a small group of men that are fucking all the women. But that's not what we're talking about.
And also making the women unhappy, right? Because the women don't have any access to a genuine, intimate, one-to-one relationship over any long period of time.
Which
so
is
it doesn't
what
work
the women
well.
want. It's the whole idea is that
what's best
the women
for kids
want
too.
that. Right, sure, if you have children.
Right.
But I still don't think that is why these men are involuntary celibates, and I don't think it's the solution to that. I think the solution is that they need to become attractive to women.
Yes, that is the solution.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that.
I don't think the two are related.
Well, I was making a minor point. The minor point was that one of the ways that societies around the world have figured out that you keep young male aggression under control is by enforcing monogamous standards, because it gives everyone a chance in some sense. So that's the only point that I was making.
Meaning it clears more women will be available for one-on-one relationships rather than one guy who is some, whatever, for whatever reason,
yeah,
some
well, you see
large
this,
figure in society.
Yeah, well, you see this happening in universities where women outnumber men. So the men hypothetically have more sexual opportunity, but that isn't what happens. What happens is that a small minority of men have all the sexual opportunity. A fairly large minority of men don't. The women are unhappy because they can't find a committed relationship. It's bad for most of the men. And the men who have all the sexual opportunity get cynical.
But isn't this in some ways against your whole idea of equality of outcome? Because you're talking about equality of sexual outcome now. If these men, if you have a guy like a LeBron James that's a dominant basketball player that just kicks everyone's ass, this is a guy who succeeded at the highest level, right? Well, there's going to be people like that sexually. There's going to be people that are better at finding mates, and this is what they enjoy. They enjoy having many mates.
Yep,
they enjoy being, yes, but if this is what they enjoy, if it's a man who doesn't want a family and enjoys dating multiple women, why is that bad?
Well, I think the fundamental reason it's bad is because it's bad in the long run for children.
It's bad for children if he chooses to have children.
Yeah, well,
that's
it.
Sense.
But that's it. That's the fundamental issue as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And I think it's the answer. Look, to give the journalist credit, that is the point she was making. You know, apart from pillaring me and caricaturing my perspective, that was the point she was making. Well, first of all, I'm not in favor of unbridled hierarchies. Like I already said, that the proclivity of a hierarchy is that all the spoils go to the person at the top, and that can destabilize the whole structure.
Yes.
So we have to have a dialogue about how to rectify that.
But how could you possibly rectify that if one man is, like say if we've got one 6'5" beautiful man who's got a perfect body and he's brilliant and he just wants to date a bunch of women, and all the rest of the people are 5'1" and they're fat and they're lazy, and like this guy's gonna, if this is the competition, he's going to win.
Yep.
There's no way around this. And even if you decide to have enforced monogamy, where it becomes a popular thing, the women are going to be more drawn to him if he chooses to date them. They might decide, I would rather have him sometimes than never at all.
That is actually what does happen.
But what is wrong with that?
Well, what's wrong with it is that it destabilizes society and it's bad for children.
Right, you said that.
Yeah, but
what if they don't want to have children? But there's a lot of people that don't want to have children. There's a lot of people that choose to go their entire life without having children. There's men in their 30s. Some of my friends have vasectomies. They don't want children. So why would that help in any way, these involuntary celibates?
Well, I think you tilt the society so that it serves the interests of, well, that's a good question.
But you see my point where
I see your point. There's no doubt about it. You're
almost forcing an inequality of outcome.
I know that was her point too. To the degree that she had a point, that was her point. Now, but it doesn't run contrary to my opinions that the issue of outcome has to be addressed. I already said there needs to be a reason for the left and the right, and that the problem with hierarchies is that they can get too steep and destabilize everything.
Right.
That does happen. That particularly happens in the sexual domain, and there's plenty of anthropological evidence for that. But you still might say, well, who cares? Because the men who are winning should be allowed to win, and the women should be allowed to choose. It's like, yes, except that there's the problem of children. And so society steps in on behalf of the children. And you can say, well, lots of people don't want to have children. And yes, and that's truer now than it used to be, although many of those people end up having children anyways, the guys who are sleeping around all the time, so that doesn't circumvent the problem. But the issue here for me isn't the men or the women, it's the children. We're trying to set up societies where the probability that children will be raised in something approximated an optimal environment is optimized. And that's going to mean sacrifice of opportunity and choice on the part of adults. It's necessary. I agree with you, but I think that what we're talking about mirrors what we're talking about in sports. It mirrors what we're talking about in business. It's everything else. There's going to be people that are better at all different aspects of life. There's going to be people that are talented in terms of like getting women to like them. Yes, that's true. Well, that's why also, look, you see this. Right. Women are hypergamous, which means they mate across and up dominance hierarchies. And so if you're a male who's successful in a given hierarchy, the probability that you're going to have additional mating opportunities is exceptionally high. It's an unbelievably good predictor of that.
that hypergamy is a very uncomfortable discussion.
Yes, it certainly is. But it doesn't matter. Well, there's plenty of uncomfortable discussions to be had.
That's a big one, though.
It is.
The idea that it defines women's sexual choices by the fact that they want bigger, better. They want someone who's more successful, someone who's higher on the social ladder than what they're accustomed to or what they have now.
Well, what women do is that, like, mate choice is a very difficult problem. So how do you solve it? Well, here's how women solve it. Throw them in a ring, let them compete at whatever they're competing at, assume that the man who wins is the best man, marry him.
Yes.
It's a brilliant solution. It's a market-oriented solution. It's actually the solution that appears to have driven our evolutionary departure from chimpanzees.
It's a biological solution.
It's a biological solution, but it has a cost.
What is the cost?
Well, the cost is polygamy. And so we rein that in with enforced monogamy. And we do that in order to provide stable circumstances for children.
Is a polyamorous society just as unattainable as this utopian Marxist idea?
Yes, I think so, because it looks like, and this is another point I was making that didn't get covered in the article, although I wrote about it somewhat extensively on my blog, is that societies tilt towards monogamy across the world. It's human universal. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't have polygamous or polyamorous tendencies, because they certainly do. And it's certainly also the case that one of the ways that women gerrymander this system is that, like, the number of children who are in a, say you're married and you have children with your husband, but you also have an affair. And so you have a child by another man. That's more common than anyone suspected. So part of the way that women solve the problem that you're just describing, and I'm not saying anything for this or against this, this is a purely factual biological claim, is they pick a monogamous marriage and they cheat with high-status guys. Now, obviously in the confines of the marriage, that's a terrible thing, but...
That's a very uncomfortable subject, though, for women in particular.
Well, it's an uncomfortable subject for everyone.
Right, but
it's a terribly uncomfortable subject.
They don't like the idea that this is a common thing, that women choose a safe man that is willing to be monogamous with them, and perhaps maybe they're above him in a social class or in sexually, and then they'll cheat with someone who is above them.
It's common, but it's not the norm. Right, it's still the norm not to do that. The norm is fidelity.
Right.
But there's plenty of exceptions.
And this is enforced monogamy, culturally, the norm. This is the very definition of it.
Well, enforced monogamy is this. It's like, okay, so my son's getting married in September. And so let's say he comes to me in a year and he says, hey, Dad, guess what? I've had 3 affairs in the last year and they've all been successful. I haven't got caught. Aren't I a good guy? What am I going to say to that? No. What the hell are you doing? That's not what you're supposed to be doing. That's enforced monogamy.
Enforced monogamy meaning the people around you try to guide them in a way that you think is going to lead to a harmonious family life.
It's built deep into the cultural norms, and if that starts to destabilize, then there's trouble. And that doesn't mean that it's not prone to all the problems that you laid out. Look, there isn't a bigger problem than successful reproduction. It is the big problem. And all of the solutions that we've generated for it are full of flaws. Like, here's an example. The gender pay gap. Okay, there's no gender pay gap. There's a mother gap. There's other reasons too, but women really take a hit when they become mothers. Okay, that's unfair. Fair enough, man. What the hell are you going to do about it?
It's not just